Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Our show believes that women should be treated with respect at all times and in all places. Here's today's moderator, Dr. Susan Strauss.
Hi, and welcome to It's a Woman's World. I'm Dr. Susan Strauss, and have we got an interesting show for you today. You're going to learn a lot. But before we get started, I'd like to have my co-hosts introduce themselves. Ty, go for it.
Hello, I'm Ty Goodwin, and I'm happy to be here.
Good to have you here, too. It's been a while.
And I'm Jamela Pettiford. I'm also glad to be here.
And Jamel, it's always good to have you here.
Thank you.
Ali?
And hello, just as well. Happy to be here as well. Ali Nathani.
Good. And we have got two great guests today that are going to be discussing an important topic that is gaining quite a bit of press and notoriety. Our first guest is Dr. Ellen Kennedy, and Dr. Kennedy is the Executive Director of World Without Genocide. Good to have you here again, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we have a brand new guest that's not been with us before, an attorney by the name of Ashlyn Kendzior. Did I say that right?
You did.
And she is a Ferenz Fellow, which we'll find out what that is, in Human Rights and Law at Gender Justice as a staff member there.
Well, I'm excited about this topic. I mean, it's a little bit saddening, but as a former school teacher, you know, I'm really curious to talk about this. We've been kind of swabbed in the Me Too movement and how it fixes or how it focuses on adults, but we've kind of overlooked what it does to our children in schools. And so we're here with you to talk about Title IX in K-12 today.
Ty, thank you so much for that important start to this conversation. Everybody knows about #MeToo. Women all over the world have been talking about sexual abuse and sexual harassment that they've experienced. But that kind of behavior doesn't just begin when a woman is 21 or 18. And back in 1972, the United States issued what we now refer to as Title IX, which says that there can't be any discrimination based on sex in any educational institution that accepts federal money. What that's meant is that colleges and universities can't discriminate in any way on sex. People typically think, oh, that got us started with women's sports. And it certainly did. But it means so much more. It means that when there is sexual abuse or discrimination or harassment on a campus, it must be prevented and it must be addressed. So there's been quite a lot of attention recently. But that attention has really only focused on colleges and universities. Nobody is really looking at what's happening in K-12. And that's part of what we want to talk about today, because young girls and young boys are not automatically protected until they turn 18 and go on to higher education. The situation is very, very challenging.
And Ashlyn, I know that you're going to be talking about this a little more, but I think one of the first things, I'd like to know what this Ferenz Fellow in Human Rights and Law is all about that you're working on.
Yes, so I'm the Ferenz Fellow in Human Rights and Law, one of several at World Without Genocide. And it was named after Benjamin B. Ferenz, who is the sole surviving prosecutor from the Nuremberg trials.
Wow.
He was only 27 years old when he prosecuted for the murder of 1.5 million Jews. He was the youngest prosecutor at the time, and it was also his very first case.
Wow.
So it is an
Wow.
absolute honor to have a fellowship in his name.
Wow. How many of those are given out? And is it only through you that they're applied?
Yes, so I think there are 3 of us working specifically in this area doing Title IX and child marriage, but there are also fellows working in other areas with World Without Genocide as well.
And maybe you could say something about gender justice, too. I'm familiar with gender justice. I've done some work with gender justice. Wonderful that they do. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Gender Justice is a nonprofit legal advocacy organization. We do mostly litigation is what we're known for, and we work on everything touching gender equity. So sexual assault cases, discrimination cases, employment cases, things like that.
Yeah, it's an impressive organization. Can you tell us something now? What are you doing about Title IX? Tell us about that.
What are we doing about Title IX? Well, right now the biggest focus is not getting these regulations passed. Back in November, the Department of Education issued a set of proposed changes to Title IX, which effectively makes it a lot more difficult to hold an institution accountable for sex discrimination. So the major thing that we've been focusing on over the last couple of months is putting forth an organizational comment. So Gender Justice submitted one saying, here's our expertise. We work with students all the time who have experienced sexual harassment, mainly on college campuses, and this is why it's going to be really difficult. It's going to impact survivors who have experienced this. One of the major changes is that schools will not be liable for sexual harassment or investigating claims if it didn't happen on campus. So the majority of students are living off campus. Suddenly that is just not the school's priority or the school's problem. It's also making really sweeping changes for LGBTQ plus students and making it easier to get religious exemptions so that you can discriminate against that community and it can be completely legal. So what we're doing now is trying to stop those from getting enacted.
One of the other things that it's doing, I think that's alarming, is it would allow the perpetrator to, during a hearing, for example, to question the alleged victim directly. And once victims are aware of that, that's going to be problematic. Those laws are much more problematic, I think, in the university college setting. That's going to be handled, well, we're not quite sure in the K through 12. Yeah.
I'm curious, we've been in a work world for years and we still haven't gotten sexual harassment figured out. So what does it look like? What are you seeing in the K through 12 environment that as parents and as women we should really be concerned about, because we don't hear about it a lot?
I think you just summed it up. We don't hear about it, and we don't hear about it because almost nothing is being done in K-12. According to what should be happening, everyone in the K-12 systems, all of the teachers, all of the administrators, should be trained about what constitutes sexual harassment. They should be trained to know who their Title IX enforcement officer is. They should be trained to know where they should refer these complaints and how to provide appropriate investigation and victim support services. None of that is happening in K-12 throughout most of Minnesota. And this is probably the single most serious flaw. So imagine, for example, that a young child in a K-12 system experiences some sort of sexual harassment or sexual assault. That young child has no idea where to go. Let's say, for example, that in that school, the child goes to the teacher. Perhaps the teacher is someone who's not familiar and comfortable with talking about these issues. Maybe the teacher refers the child to the principal. Imagine a 7th grade girl talking about sexual assault with the high school principal. There's been no appropriate remediation for these kinds of issues throughout that whole K-12 system. Almost none. So there are efforts within Minnesota to make changes and to get the Department of Education more actively involved in raising awareness throughout K-12 school districts, in providing adequate training, and informing parents about what the situations are and, if they arise, what the appropriate steps would be. It's been swept under the rug.
And speaking of, junior high and kind of that age range, we're seeing a lot more of young girls committing suicide.
Yes.
And we're seeing them committing suicide because they don't have those avenues and places to be able to speak comfortably where they feel safe about, being sexually harassed. What is kind of your modus operandi when you're moving into the thought process of this and being able to look at those numbers and saying we're seeing an increase of girls in this age range that are committing suicide based upon sexual harassment and bullying on the school bus and after school programs and the community centers? What is the kind of the conversation about these types of things that we're seeing?
I think, as I see it, the most important issue first is to raise awareness and to be able to give people the vocabulary to be able to talk about these issues. At that age, it's very difficult. At our ages, it's still very difficult. So how do we have somebody from hopefully the Department of Education go out and provide the appropriate training resources throughout the various school districts in the state, so that there are people in every district who can bring on board the key administrators and give them the tools. Make those tools available. Have information on every school district and every school website. Being able to name and label that problem, I think, is the first step.
Mm-hmm. And I often wonder, you know, I think about these perpetrators, and I wonder, you know, many times when there are the cases or the problems, what I see from just watching the news is, okay, the perpetrator pays the jail time or says, I'm sorry, makes the statement. But what I don't see is the real work. And I don't mean to diminish and say, okay, jail is not real work, but what I mean is, we're not hearing the voices of why did you do, like the drill down, digging into, to help us understand what compelled you to hurt this child or to do this, you know, to act out on this behavior. And I often wonder, can we get more from those perpetrators in just less than a, I'm sorry and now go to jail? And I'm generalizing, but do you see my point? That I often think about it, how can we understand the root of some of these problems? These are not subjects that I think people want to talk about. What compels you to attack a child? Like, to get to that level, can you speak a little bit about that?
I think one of the issues that you and I were speaking about earlier is the issue of we're ignoring K-12 and kids are being socialized in a way that this is acceptable behavior.
It's the norm.
It is completely the norm. In schools that we've spoken to, they're willing to talk to you about sexual harassment in high school, but they insist that it doesn't happen in the lower grades in K through 8, which is not the case. We know that it happens, and we know that if we don't address it right now, kids are growing up thinking this is okay behavior. And telling them for the first time when they're a freshman in high school that suddenly you can't touch someone without their permission, they're gonna laugh at you. They're not gonna take you seriously because this is the culture they've been brought up in. So I think trying to kind of get to the root of that issue is starting young, teaching kids about consent, teaching children that this is not appropriate behavior, and making sure we all respect one another to get to a point where hopefully this doesn't happen anymore.
I think one of the big issues, well, there's two of them that I'd like to bring up. One is when we talk about kids not coming forward. I'm working on a lawsuit right now where it was a high school girl, and she and her mother came forward, and the degree of retaliation that she has gone through, not only by school officials, but by her classmates. They blame her, and she was being sexually harassed by a teacher, but they blame her. It's so severe, she's had to move out of town to attend school elsewhere. So that's one reason that they don't come forward. And the other thing that I think we miss, and I'd like to hear what you all have to say about it, is we don't look at this from a systems issue. Right. What is it about a school system that allows this kind of behavior to continue, where it has become normalized? What are we doing? And this is all over the U.S.
Oh, it is.
Well, not just the U.S., it's in other countries as well. So what is it? We know patriarchy, for example, plays a role in it, and the violence against women. It's narrowed now down to these children. I've worked on cases where there's been a first grader who was sexually assaulted by another first grader. What is going on? It gets excused. So what is going on with our school system in K through 12, particularly, that allows this behavior? They give tacit approval for it. They poo-poo it. What do you think is going on?
I think in the state of Minnesota in particular, there have been protections put in place for teachers and for administrators that almost provide an iron wall. And that's not done with any malicious or evil intent, but it's to protect them from what they fear might be perceived as frivolous accusations or unfounded accusations. But it's meant that it's extremely difficult to call them to account or even to examine those issues. The institutions are very strong, the professional associations are very strong, and until the transparency can change, till we can mandate that there is transparency, that iron wall is going to remain. We have positions where the authority line is so clear that it simply can't be broken. A child has no authority. The parent vis-a-vis that school has almost no authority. So these transgressions happen with absolute impunity. I read an article about a high school district in California, or school district in California, where some students were protesting what they called slap-ass Fridays, that are just what the term suggests. And I asked a high school student whom I know whether she had ever heard that term, and she laughed rather cynically, and she said, every day at my school is slap-ass, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever day. And she's at a highly regarded Minneapolis suburban school. Now, this gets to that issue of the culture condoning inappropriate behavior between men and women, between people who feel that they have the impunity to do these kinds of things to those who are viewed as being less powerful, to those who they think will fear retaliation enough so that they won't come forward. How do we change that? I think that's really the question that we're all struggling with.
So what role do the parents play in something like this? Because, you know, school is school, and as a former teacher, sometimes I felt the weight of having to do so much as a teacher.
Right.
You know, your social work, your teaching, your nurse, you're playing all those roles. But where do parents stand in helping their children set the standards for what's okay and what's not okay? And why is there a gap between what's happening at home and what's happening at school, or is there even a gap?
I think oftentimes what I have noticed being in the school system myself and have witnessed second graders, two second grade boys sexually assaulting a second grade girl, you know, and bringing it to the administration. And noticing that one of the first things that was said was that we are educators. We're not here to socialize the behavior of children. We contacted the parents about the behavior. The parents were enraged. The two boys were put on a 10-day suspension. And it goes back to what you were saying, is what is the culturalization of the children? How can they make it right? What changes when they're just sent home, okay? Because now they come back to school, and this same process of antagonization, you know, and being antagonized happens all over again. Now all of the other children know what happened, and now this is the conversation that's happening in the lunchroom. This is the conversation that's happening on the playground. And what I noticed is much like you were saying, this iron wall of we don't really have to take responsibility as the school, because, you know, we're looking for the community to kind of step in and handle it. But then the parents are left at a place where now my daughter, it feels unsafe every day. Now my daughter is being ridiculed and being talked about, you know, inside conversations about situations of her being mistreated by two young boys. And they did not learn anything. They did not come to a place in which they understood what they did. They only knew that they shouldn't do it. However, they did not, it was just a sorry, and I apologize. But the understanding piece was not there. It was just a formality. And so what I'm noticing is that this is something that our communities are going to have to start speaking up about, and really finding ways to make it clear to the school and to the school system and administration, this is unacceptable, and this is the standard in which we would like it to be addressed.
They also tend to want to blame it on bullying.
Oh,
and
yes.
They will
Oh, yeah.
mislabel the
It is
behavior
mislabeled.
as
Absolutely.
bullying.
It
And
is.
The policies even in schools in Minnesota conflate the two terms
Yes.
of bullying and harassment. And so administrators, teachers, they don't know how to recognize, is this bullying or is it harassment? And there's a huge difference. Bullying's not actionable, it's not illegal, and harassment is. It's a violation of students' civil rights. So what would you say about that, Ashlyn? What do you think?
I find that to be infuriating, especially like I mentioned, when you're telling me that, oh, this doesn't happen in K through 8 or whatever it is, and that's just bullying. I think they're missing a major point, is that people are being taught at a young age that this is acceptable. And I think one of the other major things that they're missing is the intersectionality component.
Yes,
this
good
is
point.
not just an issue for wealthy white students.
Yes.
This is an issue of people being sexually harassed because they are also African American,
Yes.
or they also identify as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. that's not just bullying if there is a sexual component and they're creating a hostile environment. And I think schools are just completely missing the point when they're saying, oh, it's bullying, and they're just writing it off as that type of behavior rather than addressing all of the issues leading to that behavior.
And I also noticed that the reason why the interchangeable happens with harassment and bullying, there is so much more process that has to go into a harassment case than just to claim it as bullying and then putting all of the staff through like an OVAIS, bullying training, and then just, kind of washing everything as bullying, because now I have to go through the extra steps. I have to stay later from work, all of the other behavioral stuff that I have to do. Now I have to do a harassment case, which goes now to the union, which now goes to the school board, which now goes to our school social worker. So it has to be elevated then. So it's easier to stay under the guise of this is just bullying. So now we can just let the community deal with it or not, and then we can go on to our everyday life.
I think we have to recognize that this is a problem that is coming to us top down.
Oh, absolutely.
We see this at the highest levels of government, of business, of the arts.
Yes.
And we're all aware of the challenges in trying to deal with it.
Yes.
And it also is a problem from the bottom up.
Yeah.
We have to empower people to be able to speak up, so that somebody who's speaking up in a community somewhere knows that if she or he is speaking up there, that person is not ever alone. There may not be somebody standing alongside of him or her in that very space, but throughout the country, there will be hundreds or maybe thousands of other people who are saying, yes, I'm with you, I've got the same issues, I'm approaching my school board, my faith community, my school, whatever it might be, my state legislature. We must make this a national effort from the bottom up, because it certainly is not changing from the top down. No. We've seen, as Ashlyn was saying, the efforts of the current Department of Education at the federal level to weaken Title IX, and to weaken Title IX to make it increasingly difficult for those who are survivors of these kinds of attacks to feel safe, to bring forward the accusations against the accused. And all these changes by the Department of Education in DC are designed to protect the accused.
I do want to give credit here in Minnesota. The first 3 cases in the country, they weren't lawsuits, but that were filed with the state agency, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. One of them was in California. 2 of them were in Minnesota. They were the first 3 in the country, and that was in 1990. Wow. And at the time, schools were looking at sexual harassment. They were having people come in and train, but you know what changed it? Is the bullying tsunami.
Yeah.
That totally shifted the focus, and sexual harassment was left out, and let's just call it bullying.
Yes, yes.
And that's a really critical point, Susan, because we say, let's just call it bullying, or it's just bullying, and we're diminishing the consequences of that behavior, because bullying is on a spectrum, and that bullying can lead to sexual harassment, can lead to sexual abuse, that ultimately for that person who is being victimized can lead, as you said, to suicide. Yes. So that spectrum of that behavior is what we cannot overlook.
There was one study that was done that demonstrated that when students who are sexually harassed, that it impacts them much more than if they are bullied.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it was good to get the research that would support it, even though both of them, that's not to minimize bullying.
Right.
Bullying is extremely detrimental to kids. But
one thing I just want to ask is, we hear the statistics, we hear numbers, we hear this law, that law, but really what this comes down to is the human element of what this is. And so I think, not that I want to make victims have to say their story over and over, but I think there's an accountability here to listen and to stop putting things at a theoretical level or at a the numbers are important. I don't mean to diminish data either, but I think when you ask somebody, when you hear what somebody has suffered, and you as a position in power, how can you not make change upon that, right? Like cutting to the edge of what this is all about. Right. Many people who go into the school profession are people who have a heart or want to give back, and there's compassion there. So when we get to levels of power, where is that compassion? Where is that human element? And I just feel like in so many of these cases, so much of that is missing sometimes. We forget that piece.
And I often realize in these situations, the human element, oftentimes there isn't room for that. And that's the unfortunate piece. Oftentimes people are picked for these positions because they have a certain level of cold edge. And that's the unfortunate that I've noticed in elementary schools, K through 8 in particular, where our children have cried out and have said, I'm being abused continuously on the bus. I have a boy who is asking me to do things on the bus, or when we get to the school bus stop, you know, they're grabbing me and they're making me kiss or touch, and I don't like it. And it's like, well, you know what, stay away from them.
Yes.
You know, and that becomes the cop-out. And so the unfortunate thing is the humanness is not what people are employing.
So I want to give the remaining time to the two of you on what advice would you give to our viewers? What do you think, especially if there's parents, what do you think parents should do? And if there are educators, what would you advise to educators?
Do you want to speak to it?
Absolutely. One of the things I want to tell parents is to empower your children to come forward. This is nothing to be embarrassed about if you have been sexually harassed or sexually abused. For educators, I want them to be cognizant of the fact that it takes a degree of privilege and power and healing to come forward for students. And as well, you need to recognize that as they're coming forward, they're still students. So continuously pulling them out of class to relive the worst thing that's ever happened to them is not necessarily an ideal situation. Having a streamlined process by which a student can talk to someone that they trust and can tell their story is going to be really powerful to make change and just to recognize this is no longer acceptable behavior.
Very good. Ellen?
I want to add to what Ashlyn said so eloquently, and that is for the parents not to feel ashamed. That's a huge issue. If a parent feels that this speaks negatively in some way on his or her parenting, that's not the case. And the parent needs to feel that he or she has the opportunity to speak up for the child and can be joined by others in the community. We are a community, and it's time for all of us to link arms and to stand together as a community to help protect our children, all of them.
Well said, because boys can also be sexually harassed, particularly boys that don't fit the stereotype of what a real masculine boy should be. Anything else? Any of the rest of you want to add?
No.
Well, we are out of time, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope that you've learned something. A special thank you to Dr. Kennedy and to Ashlyn, and congratulations on being able to get that particular honor. And thanks to my co-host today, and thank you for joining us. I hope you have a good day. See you next time on It's a Woman's World.